Welcome to the African Alliance podcast, the BRILLIANT series, brought to you by the BRILLIANT Consortium's Community Engagement and Advocacy Workstream. This series introduces you to the scientists, researchers, and community activists driving innovation and social progress across our partner sites. In each episode, we'll hear from those in the front lines, whether they're uncovering groundbreaking scientific discoveries or working to empower communities through grassroots activism. These conversations give you an inside look at how collaboration between science and community is transforming lives, challenging systems, and creating solutions that can change the world. In this episode, I'll be speaking to KEMRI's Dr. Fred Sawe. So, Dr. Sawe, thank you for joining us again. Your career spans so many decades. You've been part of this research effort to bring an end to this horrible, horrible disease that has changed, the way we live and the way we love. You've been involved in so many areas: prevention, cure, treatment, from as far back as Kaposi sarcoma, now, of course, vaccines. Can you tell us a bit more about what brought you into this space, back in the day? What drove you into this space to begin to work on trying to solve some of the biggest challenges, really, that humanity faces when it comes to health?
I think to begin with, being a doctor, my work is to try and improve the quality of life of my fellow human beings broadly, regardless of what you are focusing on. And specifically in relationship to HIV, that I'm not sure when it got to South Africa, but at least in Kenya, we made our first diagnosis of HIV in 1983. But before that, we were hearing about the devastation that was going on in other parts of the world, all the concerns. And I think it got through Africa, at least for East Africa, through, the countries west of Kenya. And, we were hearing and wondering what's going on there. We thought maybe there's something wrong they're doing that we are not doing here. We didn't know it was a question of time before it crossed over to Kenya and started with some communities and then spread everywhere. And towards the end of the 90s, it was really causing a lot of misery, a lot of deaths. People were dying and we had nothing to provide them. And my first entry to this is when the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, which is part of the groups that were working on trying to find a solution to this HIV problem, especially vaccines, through the US military HIV Research Programme. They walked to my local hospital where I was working as the director of the hospital, and two Americans walked in and introduced themselves and said, "We are looking for a place to set up an HIV vaccine." And I that's interesting. Is a vaccine even possible? I thought it is just impossible to get a vaccine. But because it was causing such a misery, I said, sure, this is something we need to work on. And we welcomed them, and they came to our site, and we worked with them, set up a laboratory, and with the advent of PEPFAR, we started providing HIV care and treatment. And we started doing our first HIV vaccine trial in 2006. I think we were the second site to do an HIV vaccine. Before that, CAFI, which were in collaboration with Yavi, had done it in Nairobi. And we were the first ones to be brave to take it outside the capital city into the rural areas. Kericho is like deep in the rural community. So that's what got me into HIV vaccine work.
So it's certainly a very rich history. And one wonders what might have happened if you had told those two comrade Americans, no, thank you. Thank goodness you said, yes, please. Here we are today.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, a testament to your vision of what was to come. Dr. Sawe, these podcasts are also for community members including activists, who for years have been hearing these scientific terms. I know at least for the last 2 decades, we fought against words like experimental or discovery being used when we were reaching out to communities to take part in research. And now, of course, BRILLIANT comes along. That's very proudly, experimental research and discovery. And we're kind of wondering, how do we package, how do we communicate this concept of experimental medicine to communities, when those terms have been so loaded for so long. We know that many of our communities display vaccine hesitancy, in times of COVID as well. And we know that hesitancy has a historical context. Science and research has not always been on the good side of communities, especially Black and Brown communities. And so where you are sitting as part of the visionaries of BRILLIANT and BRILLIANT Consortium and its work, how would you describe what BRILLIANT is trying to do here when it comes to engaging with communities and the science, and why communities should feel safe and trust the science and the process, the scientific strategy that is driving the work of BRILLIANT?
For almost 4 decades, we've been trying to get an HIV vaccine, and we haven't gotten it. And it's not for lack of not trying. We've really tried very hard. We've been well funded, and I'm talking about globally, even though not at the level that we would have wished our scientists to be funded, but we are grateful with the funding that we received. And of all the clinical trials that we've done, we've made incremental steps. I'm always a believer is that if you do something and you do not succeed, that is an opportunity to learn. I don't look at it as a failure. It's an opportunity to learn how to do the next one better, especially if you do it in such a manner that as you continue with your process, you assure as the first priority participant safety. You never do anything that you are not guaranteeing safety, or that you don't take enough measures to make sure you mitigate, first of all, to prevent it from happening. And secondly, if it happens, that you are able to deal with it as a medical doctor, and that the health of the participant you are dealing with is not affected. And then as human beings, if you looked at over the centuries, we've made a lot of progress in our life. Even our life expectancy has gone up. And it didn't just happen. It just happened because people continued working and experimenting on how can we make life better. And it's cutting across all spheres of life, not just medicine. Even in medicine, this is what I always tell our participants. Every single tablet you swallow, or every vaccine you go to get in the hospital, because we are giving vaccines to children, adults, it went through a research process. And even those medicines that we already have, we are still trying to figure out how to make them work better. Like, for example, antiretroviral treatment. We started the treatment in the early 80s when people were swallowing up to 14 tablets in a day. You literally feel one hand in the morning, feel the hand in the evening. And we've gone down to now swallowing one pill every day, a very tiny pill that has very few side effects compared to what we used to have. And again, that apart from that, it is more forgiving. You remember we used to tell people, you shouldn't even forget to swallow even for one day. It will remember that you forgot to swallow and come to haunt you in future. What we have now is more forgiving, that even if you skip, I'm not encouraging people to skip, but at least you don't have to be terrified that, sorry, I forgot. You still need to do that. And even beyond that, we are going now into these long-acting injectables that instead of your pill every day, maybe every 2 months, and hopefully every 6 months, and hopefully every year, you come back for your ARVs, one shot, and you are done, or something like that. So when it comes to vaccines, after all that we've tried and we didn't get the results we were looking for, we've gone back to learn for why did it not work. And one of the things that we've learned, and we are learning from people living with HIV. So people living with HIV are helping us find solutions to the problem so that we can prevent others from catching it. So it's not like we are picking something out of the air. We are picking it by studying people living with HIV. And one of the things that we've seen in HIV is that There are some people that have been infected for HIV for a very long time. They have never started antiretroviral treatment. Yet when you take their blood to measure the HIV viral load, it is undetectable. These are elite controllers. They are able to control the virus using their natural body immune system without the benefits of ARVs. So one of the things we asked, and it affects only 1% of people. 1% of people who are HIV infected are able to control their virus without needing to take medications. So when you go back to those people and find out how are they managing it, one thing we've learned is that this group have special genes that allows them to make special antibodies that is able to control the virus. We call them broadly neutralizing antibodies. That's what they make in their bodies. And it's only 1% of the people. So one of the things we are trying to figure out is, instead of this 1%, first of all, how do we make everybody produce the same broadly neutralizing antibodies? That's the question we're asking. Secondly, how do we make people who are not yet infected through vaccination produce the broadly neutralizing antibodies so that they don't get infected? Because what we've been doing before, that we are not producing the broadly neutralizing antibodies, we were not getting the results we were looking for. Like in NV144, we got a short-lived immune response. Like at the end of 1 year, there were only like slightly over 30% of people protection. 30% is good, but we need to improve and replicate on that. So the word discovery medicine, I find it a slightly better word for the community, because we are trying to discover something. How do we do it so that everybody can produce the broadly neutralizing antibodies? Experimental medicine, when you say experimental, I'm a bit hesitant because it kind of feels like you have a guinea pig and you are doing experiment on them. But discovery really means we are working together to try and discover how do we make these vaccines work better. And this is where BRILLIANT comes in. We come in because after not succeeding with all the other vaccines, we went back to the drawing board. And we said we need to go back to the drawing board, learn from people who have been living with HIV and controlling the virus, not requiring ARVs, and how can we get a vaccine that can give us the same results on people who are not infected. By the way, this vaccine also, even though it will be used for prevention, our goal in future in HIV cure agenda is that there will be a role for vaccines, and those vaccines must be vaccines that are also producing broadly neutralizing antibodies, so that and also improving the special cells that helps to kill the virus. And we think that with the vaccines we are working on, we will also learn something on probably how to cure HIV. So the two of them are running in parallel. But we are not working on the HIV cure, but we are hoping some of the vaccines we are working on will contribute to that in future.
It's been over a year since BRILLIANT kicked off formally. Can you tell us a bit more, some of your reflections on year one of BRILLIANT? What has the year brought for you? What have been some of your key observations, learnings, difficulties, celebrations? It's a year, I guess, in the context of the work of the consortium, a year is not a lot of time. But in laying this groundwork for the next 4 years, could you share some of your reflections on year one of BRILLIANT?
Yes, it was very exciting and very nice of USAID to come up with this very revolutionary idea that we need to develop an HIV vaccine by Africans, especially sub-Saharan Africa, where the bulk of the infections around the world are from, and that the vaccine should be developed in Africa by Africans based on the vaccine that is circulating in Africa. That alone is a very revolutionary concept because you are likely to get a very good buy-in. You are likely to break the barriers of hesitancy. You talked about hesitancy, the way when a product comes from outside and you are being told to use, like it happened with COVID. Even though in Kenya we were lucky, we got AstraZeneca as the first vaccine, and some of the trials were done in Kenya. So we were able to tell Kenyans, this vaccine was actually tested in Kenya and it was safe and it worked. So take it. And people were very proud. that they were a part of that. I think for this vaccine, Africa will be very proud if we actually get a vaccine that works, because it was done in Africa by Africans using the HIV circulating virus. So yeah, thanks to USAID for that generous award that enabled us to be able to do this. And immediately after we got the announcement, of course, we got to work. And the first thing we did was to do a 5-year plan, where we planned for every year, for every site. We are 8 countries. So we all planned as a group and as a country and as a site. What are you going to do for the for the 5 years? And after that initial planning, what we've done also as participating as a consortium is to take stock of all the clinical trial sites that are participating in the study. What capacities do they have, and what are the shortfalls they might be having, so that we can try address, because what BRILLIANT is also going to do is help build capacity across the board to improve the platform for doing HIV vaccine studies. And it's not just HIV vaccine study. My site, for example, was set up to do HIV vaccine studies. But we've done 18 other vaccine studies, not just on HIV, but on almost every other infectious disease you can think of. So we've actually used the platform that we built to do other diseases like COVID, Ebola, typhoid, polio, things that are still very important to us, but we can use the platform that we've set up to be able to do that. So taking stock and building capacity will not just be addressing HIV vaccine, but it can also address other vaccines in future that we may require. The other thing that we had promised in the first year to do is that we are going to do our first clinical trial in the first year. And I think we got the award. I'm trying to remember which month we got it. It's been a year, but the award is not a complete full year. And in the space of that year, we've already identified a very good product, which is very promising, which is in the field of what we were calling discovery medicine. So we are still in our theme of discovery medicine. It's cutting-edge technology based on a messenger RNA. And you know, the messenger RNA, you saw how it revolutionized the way we were able to control COVID because of messenger RNA. It was a new technology in the field, and it was able to produce highly effective vaccines that actually brought COVID to control. I mean, there's still COVID, but if you've been vaccinated, when you catch it, it is a milder disease, at least in the immediate short term. Of course, in the long term, it still causes problems. So it is still a good idea not to catch it, if possible. And we are building on the lessons we learned on that to work on a vaccine based on the messenger RNA that we hope will replicate the same kind of success we saw with COVID. And the platform of messenger RNA is an easily scalable platform that you can produce millions of doses that can assure access so that we don't have to scramble. You remember at the beginning of COVID, the rest of the world had vaccines, but we had nothing in Africa. And we had to wait for a long time before we were able to get the same into our continent. And I think with this platform, access will be better. And one of the things we shall be doing under BRILLIANT is also manufacturing, because one of the problems is that countries that were manufacturing were hoarding the products. So if we actually manufacture it in Africa, at least we can be guaranteed access, or at least have a better chance to access with those. So I think discovery medicine is very important, because you cannot keep on doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. That is not very smart. So this is the right and the smart thing to do. As I said, as long as you assure absolute participant safety, or you mitigate against it, or if there are unknowns or there are risks, you have a very good risk-benefit ratio that you discuss with the community and say, this is what we know about this. There are others that we don't know about this. These are the risks. These are the potential benefits. And let individuals and communities make decisions voluntarily, whether to participate or not.
That's certainly a lot to think about. I mean, you know, as you were talking about how BRILLIANT understands not only the current status, but the history and capacity of the various sites, You know, our colleague Barak, of course, visited Kericho with the team a while ago. For the listeners, you'll be able to access our very first edition of the Brilliant community newsletter called Kipaji. In that first edition, we actually profile Barak's visit to the KEMRI site in Kericho. You know, one of the things you spoke about was Kenyans getting the vaccines, of course, and being very proud of their contribution. But of course, what we also know is that there's been serious issues around access. And in many cases, Africans who took part in these trials would look at their television screens at the height of the pandemic and see folks in the global north accessing vaccines, when at that time we had not even vaccinated half of our healthcare workers. So we knew at that time, as we did from HIV, that we always have to ask questions about post-trial access, which brings me to, you know, the recently completed HIV R4P conference in Peru. And even prior to that, a lot of worldwide acclaim, a lot of news headlines around lenacapavir, you know, a lot of focus on it, a lot of celebrations as well. But of course, as advocates in civil society, we had to go back and do the hard work and say, hang on, the party is great, the celebrations are great, but we need to ask some hard questions. And the hard questions begin by asking, why did the participants in the countries that made this product possible now not have access? So we constantly reminded about, despite scientists and researchers' best efforts, unless there are clear and contractual obligations put in place from protocol design phase around post-trial access, we potentially materially run the risk of doing what could be seen as farmers' dirty work. Because if our national institutes of research anywhere on the continent are supporting trials and making trials happen without guarantees of post-trial access for communities, then we have to start asking those hard questions. So in terms of that context, you know, of course, you would know from COVID, the discussions we had around intellectual property, around tech transfer, the birth of the mRNA hub, Afrigen, et cetera, the question I want to ask you is around access. Is it too early to talk about what access looks like post-Brilliant, should a product come out of Brilliant? Because history has shown us that it's too late to talk about post-trial access in the middle of a trial by the time a trial is coming to an end. What message do you have, Dr. Fred, to communities and to activists who will say, should Brilliant come up with a product, will we get access? Because history certainly tells us that might not be the case. And so what hope can you give? What guidance, what vision can you give to communities who are worried about, will we get access to the fruits of this research when history has told us that's not always the default position?
I still remember the miracle of, you know, access to treatment for HIV. The reason the world was able to discover the medicine, be able to treat the disease and make it a chronic disease like any other chronic disease, you can live almost to a full, ripe, old age, productive, and taking your medications and not infecting others. That miracle to happen for everybody was because of activists that really pushed the world conscience and saying, this is not acceptable. And, you know, for those of us in Africa, we are really very grateful, for example, for the PEPFAR program under George Bush. I always tell people, if George Bush came to Africa and ran for president against anybody, especially I'm talking about Kenya, we will probably elect George Bush and not our own local people, just because he was able to impact on the life of everybody. And that was because of activists. So activists are very right to talk about it. And the time to talk about access is at the beginning, not to wait until you have the vaccine, then you start trying to figure out how do we get it for everybody. So I think that conversation needs to happen now. And if you can look at the way the BRILLIANT was set up, that it is set up in such a manner that it is being done by Africans based on the African virus that is circulating by Africans, and the manufacturing will also be done in Africa. So we are going to build that manufacturing. And it's not just for AIDS. I mean, there is a lot of manufacturing talk, and countries are developing the biovac facilities to be able to manufacture vaccines, not just against HIV, but also against a whole host of other infectious diseases that can be treated. And even the non-infectious diseases, some of them can actually be treated by vaccinations. So I think I'm very hopeful for the future, given all the above that I've said, and given the conscious decision to go there. But I'm a believer that as scientists, we need to support science first and work on a product. Because without a product, it doesn't matter how much we talk and say what. So we need to have a focus. Let's get a good product. Let's develop the product. And even as we do that, let us talk about access. And I think if you look at globally, there are bodies now that are very committed to assure global access. I think it is in the conscience of humanity now that having what we had in COVID is not acceptable. I'm not sure whether the same thing will play out with Mpox, and we are watching it very closely because that's the next. Hopefully, it will not happen, but it potentially become another epidemic. At least WHO has declared it of global concern. It's the same thing with Marburg. That again, we will use those to gain access. I know Mpox vaccine have already come into the continent, even though they were a bit slow, and we need to continue doing research. So the more vaccines we get, different types from different manufacturers in large quantities that can be made available, the higher the chances we will have access. And then continue. And then you have bodies like WHO, SEPI, CAVI, and other philanthropic groups. There are so many philanthropic groups now that are focusing on the question of access. So I'm not worried about that, because what the manufacturers will do is a guaranteed that will buy your product if it becomes available, that people are even willing to help fund the research as it is happening, with a guarantee that for a special price that can be affordable or sustainable for at least a large majority of people, we guarantee you a market. I think that approach is very encouraging. And so specifically talking about the long-acting antiretroviral, lenacapavir, which was just recently discovered, and you get your injection twice a year. You can see the manufacturer is already licensing generics for manufacturer of generics that will bring the price down. And I'm sure very soon the global community that are helping fund some of these will actually subsidize to make it available. And then availability is not just availability. We have to look at all the processes of delivering that product until it gets into somebody's arm. So those are all the things that we need to work out, the systems and that will assure the delivery of that, not just having the product.
This is the BRILLIANT series of podcasts, brought to you by the Consortium's Community Engagement and Advocacy Workstream, introducing you to the scientists, researchers, and community activists at the center of HIV vaccine discovery. Today, I'm speaking with KEMRI's Dr. Fred Sawe. You know, of course, lenacapavir is not the only promising thing to come out of HIV R4P. We heard about a lot of exciting drugs that double HIV prevention and birth control, PrEP-loaded douches, and so on and so on. So when there's all of these powerful prevention tools around, why do we still need a vaccine?
The problem is vaccines generally are always very cost effective. If you are going to be on your injectable PrEP, even if it's every year, you need a whole complex, sustainable infrastructure to make sure that you are always getting your injection when you need it. So you require a more upscaled healthcare system to be able to support that delivery. You must be willing to come every year, even if it is every year, to come for that injection. And we know it's not for everybody. Not everybody can come. Not everybody likes injection. That is why we have a supermarket approach, where we give people so many options and people pick and choose. There might be people who will never go for the vaccine because of all the conspiracy theories that are there, but they will have no problem taking a PrEP, a long-acting PrEP, or a PrEP that is combined a family planning and an antiretroviral to protect you, or something like that. So I think we need to have something for everybody. That is the first spot. The second problem is the cost effectiveness. Vaccines generally tend to be very cheap and very affordable, and maybe more democratic. It can be more accessible to more people, as opposed to where you are relying on a healthcare system to deliver to you a product. And we know that a lot of our people are not able to access that healthcare system, even when it is free in quotes. There are other things that stop you from accessing. But a vaccine, hopefully, will just be able to get you a shot and you are done, and you can provide herd immunity to the people who are living next to you in your community without requiring from you a high level of adherence.
You know, you touched on conspiracy theories and trust. What has it been like to prepare for discovery work like Brilliant in the aftermath of COVID, which brought, you know, these waves of mistrust in the government and in science? Because constantly, when we asked communities, why are you not taking the vaccine? The constant refrain was, we don't trust our governments. Whether that was Kenya, South Africa, Zambia, the constant refrain is, we wouldn't trust government on the best of days. Now, what about with the vaccine in our bodies? So with the wave of mis and disinformation, you know, in South Africa, we took our Chief Justice, we laid charges against our Chief Justice for the comments he was making around vaccines. He likened vaccines to the mark of the beast and the devil, etc., etc. And so we've seen this constant mis and disinformation at times from those who have power and platform. How has it been setting up the work of Brilliant on the back of COVID, where there's so much mistrust in general in the scientific endeavor, and conspiracies, of course, as you pointed out, abound. Everything from microchips in the vaccines to 5G to Bill Gates trying to wipe out Africa to a whole range of conspiracies. How have you found that journey in setting up Brilliant?
I think the most important thing in Brilliant, why I think we have a better chance of succeeding, and again, also this is the brilliance of, you know, what USAID did in the RFP and the award, was to make sure that there is a strong component of community involvement in the design of Brilliant, the execution of Brilliant, and what you are doing now, doing this podcast that you are going to share, and what you are producing as part of community as education. That is very important because, you know, in this age of technology, people can always go back and cite, and they will find this conversation we're having now, maybe 10 years down the line when we have a vaccine. And they can actually see that we actually talked about these things, we discussed about these things, we were aware about these things, and we keep the conversation going as we continue. I think the problem with the COVID vaccine, it was drowned by a few people that make a lot of noise. And sometimes it is not your enemies, the ones that are making noise that are important. It's your friends that were quiet when all these things were going on, that they were not speaking up. And I think for us, we shall continue to be advocates. As scientists, we need to advocate for this and keep on engaging in every forum that is available. Let's bring it to the table for discussion. And retrovirals, even though there is still a lot of stigma, but you will still, accept that the level of stigma isn't as high as it was when it was a death sentence. That when you are tested, there was no treatment, you died, and you kept quiet. People now speak freely. If you stood and said, I'm HIV positive, about living with HIV, it's like you're telling us your name for the large majority of people. We don't have that fear that we had. And I think that is what is the motivating thing, because you are able to link the good treatment we are getting, the research that brought to that treatment, and link it up as a bridge to why we need to develop a vaccine. We are not yet where we need to be.
During COVID, certainly at the height of COVID, while so many scientists and researchers were working, you know, in this global race for a vaccine, I recall we had one principal investigator who said on public record that engaging communities is a spectacular waste of time. People are dying, and you want us to sit and discuss with community. And our job as a scientist is to get the product, but you are busy here telling us to waste time and engage with communities, but people are dying. Let's keep those communities alive first, then we can engage with them, because of course we can't engage with dead people. So our priority has to be the science and not community. So you have been part of so many clinical trials in the course of your career, and I'm sure you've seen big changes in the way clinical trials studies are run. What can you say about the evolution of community engagement within clinical trials, and how it's evolved, if at all?
When we started, when I joined research from bedside, I was a bedside doctor, I wasn't trained like a clinical research person. I mean, we were so focused on, the product, take it, like that. All the things about behavioral, even though I did community health, and we know that perception of the community is important, but it was one of those topics you did in the middle of a lot of other topics that you do. I think whoever makes the comment that community is not important at this stage is really being done out of ignorance. It's out of ignorance that I think such a person has not spent enough time listening to community perspective, reading around research around community perspective and the thinking around drugs. Like we just came from an SCTG meeting, and the SCTG group has actually formed one of the themes in the research is around behavioral science around everything we do. We must get feedback from the community and get their take. As you do the research, you actually collect behavioral information and qualitative data, because you can produce a very good product that nobody would use because you never got inputs from the community when you are developing it. So that is really very important. Even up to the name you give to that product, you need community input. So whoever says that is somebody who is not looking at health in an holistic approach. That there is the question of, you have a good product, but will people use it? And if they don't use it, why are they not using it? And what should you have done differently to assure that the people will be able to use that vaccine? So I'm not a believer in that. I've become a convert and an advocate from the many years that I've been working. And I wanted to give you an example. Our site, we struggle with regulatory review that takes longer than we would like to. But what I've always liked in the 20 years we've been doing clinical trials at our site, our ability to recruit is very good. We are able to recruit very fast, catch up with other sites that are already enrolling. And the key is because we have tremendous community support. And the reason we have tremendous community support is because they trust us, because we have worked with them for 20 years. We tell them everything. And we have got expert community engagement teams that are able to go out to the community, and they are known. So when I was doing COVID studies, I could get up to 300, 400 people show up to come and hear about the vaccine I want to give, and I would take them through and allow them to make a decision. And even though I was telling them to go and take the approved product that was already being given across the gate from our research facility, they chose to be on the trial. And the main reason is because we talk to them, we explain to them, we give them a choice, and we give them options on how to reach us if they have a problem. So I think if you respect community, listen to them, and have a dialogue with them, you can actually overcome those barriers. I remember when the vaccine got into our town the first time, I was among the very first ones to go get the vaccine. Because I had read about it, I had followed the science, I knew it is much better to get that vaccine than to catch COVID. And I went, and people were complaining, even my own family, like, why did you do that? Because people thought I was going to drop dead the next time. And then they waited a few days, and then my own colleagues went, and then everybody went. And so I think as scientists, we must lead in the front. We cannot be behind.
What is the one thing you would like activists to know about your work and the work of the field in general? Historically, of course, it's not always been an easy relationship between activists and researchers and scientists, but the logic has always been there. We've always known, I think, collectively in our hearts, in our souls, in our minds, and now we know, it's good science to engage communities, apart from being the right thing to do. What is the one message you have for activists who are working in this space to really stand by scientists and researchers to keep science honest on behalf of communities?
Activism is very important, and you are the voice of community. You bring reason. Sometimes as scientists, we lose track of, I don't know, what do you normally say? Like you can't see trees from the forest or something like that. So you are able to really get to the gem of what really is important. And activism is in two forms. There is the activism that produces positive results because it is the right thing to do. There is also the negative activism. These guys who have all these very bad conspiracy theories, those are also activists in their own right. Are you following what I'm saying? But they are the destructive type in the way they are talking. And you know, like as a doctor, I used to, when a patient comes in very late for treatment and we are unable to help the patient, maybe we cannot save the patient or they recover with a lot of sequelae, we blame the patient and say, you are late in coming for treatment. You should have come early when the problem started, or you should have gone to the right place. And then later on, I thought about it and said, so whose fault is it that the patient came late for treatment? And I said, the fault is still ours. We have not gone to the community to explain to them why it is important to seek help as soon as possible and appropriate help. So rather than you delaying or taking herbs before you come to hospital, that it is better to come fast. So we still have a role to try and address some of those negative activism. And but the positive ones, we need to work together. And I think we are in a better place of success because of the community. The only thing I would want the community is, please get the facts. Get the facts very well so that when you are articulating in the public, you are really speaking the same language as me. When I'm speaking and saying what the product does or doesn't do, you are also saying the same thing now in a language that the community can identify. And you know, the community will believe you better as opposed to the doctor. We tend to give orders, you tend to have a conversation. And so we need each other.
You know, a great Zimbabwean activist, Martha Tolana, who also co-leads the community work of Brilliant. I remember in one meeting, they were talking about, lost to follow up. And she said, we're not lost to follow up. We are bullied out of care. So I think that was really, really powerful. And I always remember that example that she gave. So Dr. Fred, what is KEMRI doing then to tackle mis and disinformation, to counter it with evidence and facts? Is there a concerted effort specifically to look at the sources of mis and disinformation, where it arises around vaccines, and tackle it?
So what I can speak authoritatively about is because KEMRI is a national organization. They have research facilities across Kenya. But I'm talking about my research facility in Kericho. One lesson we've learned is every time you hear a rumor about anything, or we even look at the trend, like that disengagement from care. So if you enroll in a vaccine study and then you drop, we would want to know why you did. We're actually going to talk to you. And if you say my husband doesn't like it, or my grandmother, or whoever it is, because, we have a lot of significant others, that is still a very strong bond. In fact, what we call individual consent in Africa, sometimes it's a misnomer. It is a family consent. Even the whole family wants to know what is happening to a member of if somebody came in and they'll go home and the brothers and sisters will say, what you are doing is very wrong. So you need to make sure you're talking to them. So if somebody says, I didn't come because my relatives are against it, we actually go to them, sit down, and have a conversation with them. So that's how we learn. Once in a while, like a few participants don't show up. And when you find out what happened, you realize they are all from the same area. And they all enrolled on the same day. Then there's something going on in that neighborhood. So we actually go to the bar now and sit down with them and find out what is the problem, what is going on. And that is when you get some of these conspiracy theories. So I think it is identifying if possible, be proactive and try to prevent the conspiracy theories by putting out a lot of information as possible in a language that is acceptable, in a manner that is acceptable, whether through community members. So we work, for example, with a lot of the village elders, village chairmen that are working, community health workers, people who are in the community, frontline healthcare workers that the community works with them, sees them. We make sure they are on board so that when they go to some small clinic and sit in front of a nurse and they ask the nurse, hey, this vaccine that has come, should I take it? We want the nurse to be able to say, sure, you should take it. And they give the right information. If that nurse says, no, don't go for it, it doesn't matter what you say. If you actually forgot to engage them from the very beginning.
From the perspective of your site, what can we look forward to in year 2 of Brilliant?
I think going into year 2 of Brilliant, and we are already mapping those things out, our focus, as you remember, is to develop an HIV vaccine. And we really want to try a lot of vaccines because we are going back to very early phase 1 studies where we are focused on safety. Is this thing safe before you scale it up to very many people? So you are enrolling like 40 participants or something like that across several sites, and you are doing it deliberately, slowly, to make sure that you don't hurt a lot of people. And so in year 2, we hope to do at least another 1 vaccine study, if not 2, if not 3. And similarly in year 3, in year 4, we also hope to move from doing phase 1s to doing phase 2s, where you are not only confirming the safety you identified in phase 1, you are also beginning to look at, does the body make the right immune response that is likely to give me what I'm looking for, which is a preventive vaccine. And we hope in year 3, year 4, and 5, we can actually do some efficacy studies where we do now the clinical trial in the real world to see whether it actually prevents HIV acquisition. Because we don't have a blood test that I can do now to tell me that when you produce this kind of special antibodies, the vaccine is going to work. We have an idea what we think you need to produce, but they say, the taste or the sweetness of the pudding is in the eating. It might look nice on the plate until you test it. That is why we have to do the efficacy trials to actually confirm that what we suspected to be true, that it will work, actually works.
Dr. Fred Sawe, site leader at KEMRI's Kericho and member of the Brilliant Executive Committee, thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing your insights. You've been listening to the African Alliance podcast, the Brilliant series, bringing you these incredible stories of passion, innovation, and change that take us a step closer to an HIV vaccine. We're constantly inspired by the work being done by our guests, and I hope you are too. The work doesn't stop here. There's always more to learn, more to do, and more to connect with. Stay curious, stay engaged, and we'll be back soon with another inspiring episode from pioneering scientific research to impactful community activism. The individuals we feature on this show are not just changing their fields, they're shaping the future. To learn more about the Brilliant Consortium and how you can get involved, visit africanalliance.org.za and follow us on social media. If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share the podcast so more people can hear these powerful stories.